Our top story this hour are the earnings on technology. Facebook, for example, the social media giant, out with its third quarter numbers after the bell tonight. Estimates show earnings of $1.91 a share with revenue of $17.37 billion. This coming as the social media giant is under fire over privacy and antitrust concerns. Joining me right now is the founder of Andreessen Horowitz, the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz and author of the new book, What You Do Is Who You Are. And he is Ben Horowitz. Ben, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let me kick off with Facebook. You're obviously an early investor. You were an early investor in Facebook. Tell us about your take on the company today as you've watched it grow from this small unicorn to where it is today.
Yeah, and you know, my partner Mark's on the board, so I'll be careful. I'm not going to do any forecasting on it or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, look, it started out, and this is one of the things that's interesting about watching it the whole way. You know, it starts out, and it's a social network, and it's a way to share pictures with your friends and so forth. And now they're under fire about like who's going to win the election. So like it's quite a transformation and amazing. You know, the company itself is only 15 years old.
Do you expect now that these companies have, and you guys, you and Mark Andreessen have been so, you know, prescient on this and a student of what's taken place for the last 20 years, really. Are you surprised at what has taken place that today we're talking about these companies, and not necessarily just Facebook, that they are more powerful than they ever have been before? What do you think in terms of their size and power?
Yeah, well, look, I think it surprised everybody just how important it became so fast and how, like, what it means to have 2 billion users. It becomes an international company with an international user base, and people are communicating in ways they never have. In particular, I think in Facebook's case, you have a public square with kind of social norms that's 1,000 people that we used to have, and now it's 2 billion people.
Unbelievable.
And the norms don't work, and, you know, people don't obey them anyway. And so what do we, you know, like, and then it's an international community. It's not a U.S. community. And so it's a kind of a situation we've not faced before.
So do you expect that we will see a bigger regulatory hand at some point for these companies, given now that they're under fire for privacy breaches? And now, you know, you've got people like congressionals, people like Devin Nunes suing Twitter for, you know, censoring conservative speech. Tulsi Gabbard is suing Google for the same reason.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think that people are, you know, people are up in arms, and I think that they're misinterpreting like what's possible a little bit. Like, you know, when I read it, it sounds like, you know, oh, like we can just roll back the clock on technology and stop social media. Well, no, like even if you like blew up Facebook or whatever, like social media is still going to be there. You know, it's probably going to be in the form of Tencent or a, you know, a company where you really don't have regulatory control. So I think you have to be kind of measured in how you think about how we get to the future. And then also I think, look, it's a systems problem. It's not a good versus evil. Mark Zuckerberg's probably the most earnest, committed CEO in technology. And, you know, he hasn't taken a salary, I think, in like a decade. And he hasn't taken any new stock options. He's not doing it for his personal gain. He really does want Facebook to be the right thing. So I think that, you know, the correct way to approach it is to understand that we're talking about a new phenomenon here.
I think people agree with you on that. I mean, that's the way he came across in the testimony, by the way. Last week, we just saw pictures of him walking in the testimony. How do you see China? I'm glad you mentioned Tencent. How do you see China in the face of all of this? Because on the one hand, we know that this is an enormous growth opportunity. You've got 1.4 billion people in China, and American companies want to get their, you know, their exposure there, and they want to expose to that huge market. And at the same time, you've got rules in China, and this is a communist country, and they're tracking their citizens, and they're using facial recognition to do that, and you're being forced to change the search engine if you're Google, or change the way you do business to you know, appease the Chinese communists.
Yeah, well, and Daryl Morey, I mean, we got a big taste of that. Daryl Morey, not a tweet, or a retweet, which he immediately deleted.
That's
and
a good point.
Like, and you see the like fury of the reactions. So it's not something like we're used to here. And in fact, China employs more people to surveil and spends more money surveilling their own people than they do on national defense. So it's a very, very different view of how you run a society. And I think, you know, one thing that we have to consider is if our tools, if our platforms for communication, like we hamstring them and kind of shut down those companies or defeat our own companies, then the companies we're going to be using are the Chinese products. And those rules are not rules that I think anybody here is going to like.
Mark Andreessen, for years ago, was famous for saying software will eat everything, right? I mean, you know.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he was right about that.
And he was right about that because there's a software product for every industry, every company, and that's where a lot of the growth has been in the private market as well. You see so many things that cross your desk. Let's talk about this because it's been a bit of a roller coaster year for IPOs with these valuations where they are in the private market. Are things getting excessive in terms of valuation? How would you value what you're seeing, and where in particular, we're going to really get this from you, where do you see the growth in the private market at this point?
Yeah, so, you know, like I'm not one to kind of speculate on whether we're in a bubble or not in a bubble or this or that or the other. I mean, like I think that, you know, historically the tech multiples are not, it's not like 1999. So, you know, having been CEO in 1999, I remember what that was. And those were off the charts. These are not off the charts. In terms of growth in the private sector, it's actually very interesting. So one of the fastest growing sectors is fintech, or what we call fintech. And that's kind of driven by a few things. One is that, you know, the trust that consumers had in banks just really waned after the 2009 crisis. So if you look at like the younger cohort, somebody say 20 to 25 years old, they probably don't have a credit card. They don't trust banks. They don't trust kind of that whole system. And so the good news, you know, for new companies is that creates an opportunity for them to go grab consumers in a way that you couldn't have before with new products, with products that don't charge exorbitant hidden fees and interest rates and these kinds of things.
Is that why you're seeing things like Apple Money and, you know, all these tech companies are trying to come out with financial products?
No, absolutely so. And I think that, you know, almost many companies that we see are becoming fintech companies. I think we just saw, you know, Uber kind of move into that direction the other day.
That's right, exactly.
And I think we're going to see a lot more of that for sure.
You wrote a book. It's a new book titled What You Do Is Who You Are. It's a big focus on the corporate world and how executives can help build a culture that can weather any storm socially or financially. Apropos for today's climate, where you've got the Business Roundtable coming out and saying, look, shareholders are not the only ones important. You know, in fact, stakeholders are more important. Tell me why you wrote the book and the point you're trying to make here.
Well, look, you know, there's a lot of criticism of how companies are run these days and so forth. But like what I find in my work is that nobody, like the tools to how you build a culture are not really that well articulated. In particular, like it's very hard because you're talking about how people behave when you're not there, when you're not looking. Like, do they show up to meetings on time? Do they return a phone call? Do they, you know, when they're doing a business deal, is it optimized for the price or for the partnership? Like, what are all these behaviors? They're not your KPIs or your mission statement and those kinds of things. And how you move that and shape that over time turns out to be really complex. And the bigger the company is and the faster it grows, the more complicated it is. So I thought that there was a real need to just help people with those issues.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, what do company CEOs need to understand better? Do you think it's what we were talking about in terms of the Business Roundtable, that it's not just about money?
I think that gets overstretched. You know, we've gotten to this world where it's like Shakespearean good versus evil.
Yeah.
And like, oh, like something bad happened, you know, that's a bad CEO and so forth. But like there really is much more kind of Greek tragedy, humans against the gods. And like the gods are the system. And the systems get very, very complex when you get 2 billion people on a social network and these kinds of things. And so, you know, the thing that I try to help with the book is like, how do we make the system better as opposed to, you know, how do we cut somebody's head off?
I love the fact that you said that fintech is one of the hottest areas of growth right now, because we're also talking about Libra with Facebook. CEO Mark Zuckerberg defending the cryptocurrency in a congressional hearing last week. What do you? How should our viewers look at Libra versus other currencies versus the crypto world?
Yeah, so let's just start with the problem that Libra aims to solve. So, you know, Facebook would like to have payments and money in their social networking system. It'd be very convenient for users. You can do, you know, all kinds of things. You know, your friends you often exchange money with and so forth. But money has a problem, traditional money, that it doesn't scale beyond a country boundary. And so the idea with Libra is that you have kind of a way to do kind of payments and money exchange that is international. They're doing it in a way using a new technology known as cryptocurrency, which basically is a software that's not necessarily owned by a company.
Yeah.
It's just a kind of an open source service.
It's fascinating.
That you can trust the code.
What's taking place. Ben, it's great to have you.
Okay, thank you, Maria.
Ben Horowitz joining us.